Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Has the recent espionage scandal with former journalist Shantanu Saikia at its centre cast a shadow over the journalist profession? Recent blogs suggest that what we've discovered is perhaps the tip of a very worrying iceberg. So could our worst fears turn out to be true, or is that a sweeping generalization that is both unwarranted but also unfair? That's the debate in part 2. But first, with just 5 days to go for the budget, we start a series of discussions on the state of the economy and what India's top economists, industrialists and analysts are hoping for. Tonight in the first, we ask how do they view the economy and what steps do they believe the finance minister needs to urgently take. Joining me now for our first discussion about the economy is the president of CII and chairman of DCM Shriram, Ajay Shriram, former chief economic advisor to the government of India, Shankar Acharya, and the former editor of the Business Standard, Sanjay Baru. Dr. Acharya, let's start with the state of the economy. Do you accept the new growth figure that puts the rate of growth at 6.9%, or would you say that it's questionable because it's out of sync with what's happening in terms of investment, credit offtake, company results, exports, and of course the latest IIP figures as well?
No, I would agree with you, Karan, that it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. There's, I think, a genuine problem here, and this is the first time I believe that such a problem has occurred in India's statistical history. Aside from all the factors that you mentioned, there's also, if you recall, that in 2013-14, we had a mini balance of payments crisis, and yet we are supposed to have grown at 6.9 or 7%. It somehow doesn't hang together.
So would you say that when the finance minister gets down to doing his calculations for the budget he presents on Saturday, he should go by the old figures, not the new ones?
Well, I think it's less a question, Karan, of particular numbers. I think what I would suggest for the consideration of the finance minister is that he does not get swayed into a situation where he believes that things are pretty good, we'll just have to make it better. I think the reality is that things are not so good. In fact, they're still pretty bad on the economy, and the budget should make a very strong effort to improve the growth rate, whatever it is, to improve employment opportunities in particular, and to do so in a non-inflationary way and without stress on our external financial situation.
Ajay Shriram, one of the things that is always of concern for finance ministers is the fiscal deficit target. Now, with the oil price at just about $60, $61 a barrel, with spectrum sales, coal block sales and disinvestment substantially picking up, do you believe Mr. Jaitley can meet his 4.1% target even though tax revenues this year are pretty disappointing?
I think Karan, he can meet those targets, because if we look at the other parameters of the economy, they are fairly good. As you rightly said, the oil price is down, inflation is down, and I think the finance minister and his team are fairly tight on the expenditure side also. So I've got a feeling that they will meet their target of 4.1% for this year.
How much comfort, Sanjay Baru, can the finance minister take from the fact that inflation, whether you go by CPI or WPI, clearly looks as if it's been beaten, and it seems to have been beaten a lot faster than Raghuram Rajan was predicting it would be?
Well, I think he certainly can take comfort from that factor, and I think all the indications are that there is no immediate pressure on prices. I think commodity prices in general have been coming down. Inflationary expectations, I would argue, have actually come down. If the growth momentum of the economy picks up, and if the fiscal deficit numbers which you just mentioned are adequately convincing, I think inflationary expectations would further go down. I actually believe that the Reserve Bank of India has taken a conservative view. You could argue that the Reserve Bank of India is meant to take a conservative view, and the finance minister in fact, can take a more political view of inflationary expectations. And certainly what he does in the budget would define those expectations.
Okay.
So as of now, I would lay more emphasis on growth, on reviving investor sentiment, than worry too much about inflationary expectations.
Now, in fact, Dr. Acharya, something that hasn't revived is in fact what Dr. Manmohan Singh used to call animal spirits. Just a couple of days ago, Deepak Parekh came up with an assessment that nothing much has changed on the ground. Businessmen, he added, were becoming impatient because there was no improvement in terms of ease of doing business. How big a problem is that in your eyes at this moment of time?
Karan, I think it's a significant problem, but I think I would give a somewhat nuanced answer, which is that animal spirits, when it comes to the stock market, have been pretty alive and well, thank you, for quite a while. Where it hasn't yet taken off is in investment on the ground in terms of projects, either new projects or completion of ongoing projects. That seems to still be slower in many sectors than people would like. But remember that after Deepak Parekh spoke out, there were other captains of industry, I think that's the right phrase, who said that, really things are improving. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, but I certainly think that if you look at it from the point of view of where we are 9 months after a new government has taken office, we should the finance minister has a major job ahead to revive investment and to accelerate growth, whatever it may be today.
Ajay Sriram, you're very definitely a captain of industry, and I want to put that question to you. To what extent do you agree with Deepak Parekh's assessment that in fact impatience is growing, ease of business is not improved, and to what extent do you differ and instead agree with Arun Jaitley, who said very clearly that the government is not getting credit for raising FDI in insurance and defense, for easier FDI in infrastructure, for deregulation of diesel, for the direct benefit transfer of LPG, the coal block auctions, the land acquisition ordinance, although there could be question marks about that, and also, of course, for what Arun Jaitley calls speedier and more decisive decision making. In other words, between Mr. Parekh and Mr. Jaitley, whose side do you come down on?
Well, I'll put it this way. I think if we look back at the legacy this government inherited, and if we see the initiatives taken by this government over the last 7-8 months, I don't think anyone can say that action has not been taken. I think many initiatives, as you rightly pointed out, so many of them yourself, that it has impacted the economy. The positive mood and sentiment has changed dramatically. The ease of doing business issues, if we take various states, they are moving independently and trying to bring about their own competitive spirit to attract investments. In the last 7-8 months, I think 4 states have already had investment summits. 2 more, I know, are in the process of doing it over the next 6 months. Labor laws have been looked at. I think many things have been done. I really feel expecting everything to happen overnight is unreasonable.
Can I interrupt and put this to you? Can I interrupt? If you really believe a lot has been done, then why is the investment so poor? After all, India's investment rate has fallen to something like 30-31%, and it used to be at 38-39. Why is that not picking up? Why are things not changing on the ground whilst the Sensex keeps soaring?
As I said, we've got a legacy to take care of. Bringing about change doesn't happen so fast. You make changes in policy. By the time you get the approvals, you get the financing, you get the land allocation, you get so many other things done, it can't happen so fast. I mean, I'll give you an example. 2 months ago, there were newspaper articles on Mr. Cyrus Mistry taking over 2 years back and what he's done in terms of getting his people in place, getting companies restructured, clubbing together of the various businesses to put different groups together, etc. And they said that's good going. Now he's running a $100 billion conglomerate worldwide. Our Prime Minister and his team are running a $1.8 trillion country with 29 states. I mean, there are complexities. And second point I want to make is, investments don't happen in New Delhi. New Delhi has made changes. but the states have to change too, because actual money is invested in the states. This is where I'm seeing states changing. I'm seeing states making a much more positive effort to become attractive investment destinations.
Let me bring you in on that particular debate, Sanjay Baru. Which side of this debate do you fit in? Do you think that this is just a time lag problem and that we need to be patient? Mr. Jaitley has done enough and that results will show. Give him a little time. Or are you on the side of Mr. Parekh, who questions why ease of doing business is not improving, which is underlined by the fact that whilst the Sensex may be soaring, but investment on the ground, as Dr. Charya pointed out, is not improving?
Well, Karan, I think this government wasted its first 6 months in office. The sense of urgency that many of us expected would define economic policy immediately after the new government came to power in May, that sense of urgency was initially lacking. The July budget of Mr. Jaitley was disappointing. And then subsequently the government got itself diverted into a whole range of issues which it should have tried to avoid. I think the focus should actually have been on development, which was the singular factor that contributed to the victory of the BJP in the elections. I agree with Ajay Sriram that the government inherited a bad situation, and the government in fact knew it inherited a bad situation. But I think many of us expected the government to then say that we are in serious problems, we are in a serious slowdown, and the focus of the government would be on development. And here are all the initiatives we are willing to take. I think the first budget of the government was a wasted opportunity, but I do also think that subsequently Mr. Jaitley has understood the significance of what he should be doing. His own health improved, and therefore the health of his ministry improved, and that of government initiatives has improved. But now we are in a mode in which we should have been 6 months ago. Okay. So it's really 6 months wasted, and I really hope that this budget would come back and focus on development, focus on the economy, focus on the need to create jobs. Make in India was the singular most important initiative of this government. They have to focus on Make in India. I've kept repeatedly saying that Make in India in Hindi would be Bharat Mein Banao, and the government should actually have been saying Bharat Mein Banao, Bharat Ko Banao. Okay. In other words, Make in India should be the foundation of building a new economy and reviving investor sentiment. So I certainly hope much more would be done now, because we in fact have wasted time in the first few months of this government.
Let's then come, gentlemen, to the steps that you would like the finance minister to take in the budget, or the steps that you would like him to indicate and formally announce, even if the budget isn't where they actually happen, but to make it clear formally that they are going to happen. Let's start with you, Dr. Charya, and let's begin with this concern about India's investment level and savings level falling precipitously, because unless that goes up, manufacturing is not going to go up, growth is not going to go up. What does he need to do to boost investment, to ensure that you actually see results on the ground, not on the Bombay Sensex?
Well, first of all, I think I do want to say that I agree with Ajay that the legacy problems are very serious, and so tackling it will take some time. Now, I think in the budget, what he needs to do, the finance minister, is certainly ramp up capital spending or investment on government account, and to do that in a way which is consistent with the fiscal deficit still being under control. Now, to square that particular circle, I think he does have to consider seriously raising the tax to GDP ratio in the economy. And there are quite sensible things that can be done to raise tax revenues, such as marginally increase the rate on the general rate of Senvat and excise or services tax, restore the small customs duty on crude oil imports, and a range of other things. But I think that will be necessary. I'm a little skeptical of various kinds of financial engineering that have been proposed by people to square the circle of how to reduce the fiscal deficit while ramping up public investment. Aside from that, I think there has to be serious reform initiatives which may have already partly started. Let's take, for example, what has been done with respect to the cooking gas cylinders, which, as you know, are now handled in a different way, using the network of Aadhaar numbers and moving essentially to a cash transfer system. Now, cooking gas is a relatively small part of our subsidy problem. What I think the finance minister has to lay out a roadmap for is to do something very similar with respect to food grain subsidies, kerosene subsidy, and other major subsidies which are there in the system. Fertilizer, for example. Now,
carry on.
Sorry.
Carry on.
Yeah, and I think all these are doable. They'll all take time, but the whole point of the Jan Dhan program and the Aadhaar program, marrying them, I thought, was to move to cash transfer systems, which will not only improve targeting of these subsidies, but will also reduce their level, because at present, as all studies show, there are leakages to the extent of 40 to 50%.
I noticed that you laid emphasis on ramping up capital spending through increasing the tax to GDP ratio. You left out, did you do it deliberately, in an increased divestment target? Because that's another way of doing it, isn't it?
Well, if you're asking me, Karan, I've always been a bit skeptical of disinvestment as a source for financing budget deficits. Because really, in the rest of the world, that's not how this thing is treated.
No, but I meant as a source of capital spending.
Well, whatever spending, it's government spending ultimately. You'll have to borrow the money somehow on the side of the government if you don't raise tax revenues.
Okay, I take your point. Let me bring you in, Ajay Sriram. Let me put this to you. One of the issues that rankles with international investors, and it does rankle with a lot of Indian investors, is that the Vodafone problem hasn't still been adequately resolved. Mr. Jaitley in last budget promised not to do it again, but it remains on the statute book, and theoretically, if the government wants it, can always repeat it. Do you think this is a bullet he needs to bite, or is it just something that comes up in television studios and doesn't really put off investors either here or abroad? What's your answer to that specific one?
Well, I would say that considering that the retrospective tax issue was adopted through Parliament and the process of bringing it on 2-3 years back was through the parliamentary system, I would tend to feel, and this is what we have discussed with many people outside too, that the finance minister has frequently focused on this point that, look, we don't believe it's principally right, we are not going to do it in the future. I think this one judgment of High Court which came, which they have not challenged, is a very clear indication of their intent. So I don't think it's such a big issue that people will not invest because of that. So I think it is not such a major issue as is being made out to be, as you were mentioning.
All right, I'll just point out for the sake of the audience that there are many other top industrialists who disagree with you, but this is clearly an issue where an interpretation is required, and maybe the finance minister will take your interpretation. Coming to reform, Sanjay Baru, I noticed that one key reform that the government is shying away from and many believe is essential to boost manufacturing is labour law reform. Now, Rajasthan has done it. Madhya Pradesh is considering doing what Rajasthan has done, but beyond those two states, the central government isn't moving. Do you think the budget needs to give a firm commitment from the government that this is an issue we will tackle in the next 3 or 4 months, or is it just too difficult for a finance minister to do?
Well, first of all, Karan, if you don't mind, on the Vodafone issue, I actually take Mr. Jaitley's statement seriously. I think he has made very convincing arguments in defense of government policy. He has reassured investors that they will never go back to retrospective taxation, and I think I would at least argue that many businessmen do take his assurances seriously. As far as amending the law itself is concerned, that's a more difficult process, and I'm not sure whether this government is in a position to take that on in the parliament. The same applies to labor laws. I don't expect the finance minister to focus on that in the budget speech. I was just reading the president's address to Parliament today. There's no reference to labor law reform
right.
in the president's address to Parliament. I think these are things which will be done, but will not be done in a manner in which they kind of become lightning rods for opposition. But I think the more important thing is at the state level, many state governments are in fact changing the modalities for investment, are improving the ease of business. Again, the President's address to Parliament today referred to the ease of business. The Prime Minister has said that he is going to have state level indices to show which state is ahead of another on doing ease of business. I think that kind of competition between states is the way to go. To make more states more attractive to investors, domestic investors as well as international investors, and I would worry more about what they do on the ground rather than what is said in the finance minister's speech.
One very quick question, Dr. Shankaracharya. The BJP Parliamentary Board is meeting virtually as we speak, and they're considering the possibility of diluting the Land Acquisition Amendment Ordinance. We don't know what that dilution will amount to, but we do know that they're worried about the opposition they face both inside and outside Parliament. How much of a negative signal would be dilution of the government's own ordinance in this particular field?
Karan, I think potentially this could be a significant negative signal. But in a way, what this illustrates to me is that when in our system a bad economic law is passed by Parliament, and as I recall, the BJP voted in favor of the earlier Land Acquisition Act brought in by the UPA, changing that law within a short space of time or even a long space of time becomes a huge challenge. So I think the political sort of arithmetic of this is going to be pretty tricky.
Very quickly.
Let me just mention one other thing which is unrelated.
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
Now, one other area which I think is very important in terms of boosting both the investment climate and actual investment when it particularly comes to private investment is a serious sort of roadmap to reform the governance and efficiency of public sector banks. I don't want to go into detail, we don't have the time, but I think that's very vital.
Okay, that I think will have to be the last note on which we end this particular discussion. There's a lot there for the finance minister to listen to, a lot for him to learn. We have to wait, of course, till Friday to discover how much he takes on board. But my thanks to all three of my guests for joining me. Time for a break, but then has the present espionage scandal cast a long and worrying shadow over the journalist profession in India? Join me in a moment to find out the answer.